The road to leadership is never a straight line. On this podcast, I'm interviewing the world's most interesting leaders about their mountaintop moments, their stumbling blocks, and everything in between. I'm Jonathan Block, and this is Stumbling Blocks: How Great Leaders Are Made. Hello, and welcome to The Stumble. Since this is President's Day week, I've invited a man who served 3 presidents and saved 12 million lives while carrying out the mission they gave him. He is Admiral Tim Ziemer. He spent 3 decades in the Navy, and then when the president came calling, he left a comfortable retirement to launch and lead the President's Malaria Initiative. It's an effort that every American can be proud of, regardless of party, because it saved more than 12 million people, mostly kids, from dying because of malaria and helped prevent another 2 billion cases. Admiral Ziemer's service to country and the world is bookended, though, by deep personal tragedy. His parents ran a leprosy clinic in Vietnam, but early in the war, insurgents attacked his mom and dad, killing his dad and gravely wounding his mom. He recounts how his mom greeted him with a list of things she was grateful for when her military air ambulance touched down at Andrews Air Force Base. He recently lost his wife of 54 years, Jodi, and he talks about what it's like to find himself alone in a canoe on Golden Pond, but how his life is anchored by faith, family, and friends. Next week, my guests are the former U.S. Attorney General and his wife. It's the first interview they've granted in the 19 years since leaving office. They share a story of deep love, wrenching loss, and hope. To be the first to hear that exclusive discussion, please follow on your favorite podcast app. And if the show is worthy of their time, please share this podcast on social media or with a friend. Thanks this week to Todd Seabaugh, Rebecca Iyer, Jason Chang, and Casey Finan for reaching out with feedback. And thank you to Robin Pomeroy at the World Economic Forum for naming last week's conversation with Steve Scherer as his pick of the pods. And now, here's Admiral Tim Ziemer. Admiral Ziemer, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today. It's an honor to have the chance to learn about your incredible life of service and leadership.
Jonathan, it's good to be with you. I look forward to spending a few minutes discussing the past and applying it to the future.
Admiral, I want to jump in with your record of leadership. As I just noted in the introduction, you had a long career in the Navy, and then you left naval service, went into the nonprofit sector, and then came back to government. And in government, you, among other things, led the President's Malaria Initiative. And I want to just pause there for a second, because this is remarkable. Malaria is the leading cause of death for children under age 5 in developing nations. And you are credited, or the Malaria Initiative that you founded is credited with helping to save 12 million people and prevented 2 billion, with a B, cases of malaria since the year 2000. Your work cut deadly cases of malaria by 48%. And supported a 29% decrease in malaria cases overall. And I just want to repeat just one piece of that. The work that you led saved 12 million lives. So there's really no one else on planet Earth who is more responsible for saving more people from malaria than you. And we have a remarkable chance to learn from you today, Admiral. And so I wonder if you can just start there with malaria. I wonder, so until 2016, you were the head of the President's Malaria Initiative. I wonder if you can tell us about why it mattered to you and why you chose that mission.
Yeah, Jonathan, the Earth is a malaria planet. Malaria has been with us since the beginning of mankind. The infectious disease caused by the mosquito and the parasite has probably taken more lives prematurely than any other disease or war situation. It is the most deadly infectious disease that we know about. The fact that malaria still exists affecting people and we are allowing it to happen or not accelerating our interventions to actually minimize the impact is unconscionable. We know what causes it. We know how to prevent it. We know how to test for it. And we know how to treat for it. Now, you can't give me credit for starting the President's Malaria Initiative. Have to defer back to President Bush. because when he took office, he was a compassionate humanitarianism, but he was also interested in economic development in Africa. And with Laura's encouragement as an educator, she was interested in education development and support in Africa. So as the president weighed his foreign assistance priorities, Africa was a blinking light. Into his first term, it came to his attention this virus called HIV was going to wipe out a generation. His reaction, and you know it because you worked for him, with him, is what are we going to do about that? Hence, PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which was a funding mechanism to support the U.S. government's commitment to do AIDS work in Africa and around the world. Fast forward, as PEPFAR was ramping up and becoming very effective, someone said malaria was actually killing more people, dying. More people were dying from malaria than HIV, and it was affecting a very vulnerable group, mothers of childbearing age and kids under 5. The question was, what are we going to do about it? The credit for launching the initiative goes to the president and the advocacy of his team to go to Congress and put this on the foreign assistance dartboard as a key international foreign assistance intervention. So complementing both the administration and strong bipartisan support by Congress, the PMI initiative was started, and then I was called and asked if I would be willing to serve.
Sure. I want to just clarify that PMI, and we'll use that term throughout probably, but it stands for the President's Malaria Initiative. And as you said, it was an initiative designed to cut malaria, launched by President Bush, but supported after President Bush by President Obama. And initially, did President Trump support it initially in his first term?
Yes, the continuity there wasn't quite as focused and the same priority that we saw coming out of the Bush White House, but the understanding of the positive impact that this foreign assistance initiative was having in Africa and Asia was clearly recognized by the Obama administration. That continuity and that initiative continued when I left PMI following the Obama administration. I was asked to join the Trump's first administration, and I went in as the Global Health Security and Biodefense Director. And I was able to continue to advocate and demonstrate that investment in both malaria and HIV were in fact having huge impacts, positive impacts on return on investment and saving lives.
And then what about the Biden administration?
The Biden administration continued it. When you have a successful program, it's human intuitive reaction to just keep pushing the button, okay?
And then how about the second Trump administration?
Let me step back for a second. As we know, there have been some huge changes in how and where we do foreign assistance. I was hosted at USAID as the PMI coordinator, and then I went back following my year and a half with the Trump administration and led the humanitarian assistance directorate at USAID. I enjoyed participating in what USAID did on the foreign assistance and disaster preparation. As we know, USAID was shut down.
Yeah.
Everything has a shelf life. And when an organization no longer can keep up or demonstrate impact or accountability, it's time for a change. The process that it was done has gendered a lot of criticism, Jonathan.
Yeah.
In the Navy, we have beautiful ships, beautiful airplanes, but all of those tools have a shelf life.
Yeah.
And in the Navy, when a ship is too expensive to run, can't keep up with the fleet, is not able to do its mission, we have what we call a decommissioning ceremony. And we bring everybody together and we say, thank you for your service. We fly airplanes over and make a lot of noise, tell sea stories of days gone by, and we march the crew off, celebrate their contribution, and we don't terminate them. We just march them down the pier and put them on a newer vessel. But there is a proper way to shut down an organization and continue the mission. The good news is, looking at the budget, Congress continues to recognize HIV, maternal health, and malaria as good foreign assistance investments. So what we have to do is keep an eye on how to help Secretary Rubio funnel those funds into the countries to support their country malaria plan. My concern is, through the turmoil and the upheaval, we might lose some momentum. And the malaria mosquito doesn't care. The female Anopheles mosquito is looking for fresh blood. And when there's a drop in spraying bed nets, sulfur dioxide, paramethamine for pregnant women, then the mosquitoes are going to thrive.
Yeah.
And as the Minister of Health in Zanzibar said to me, Dr. Mohammed Jadawi, he said, Zanzibar has eliminated malaria 3 times. I hope this time with PMI we can do it for the final time.
So you're one of the rare people in the world who has directly served President Bush, President Obama, and President Trump. And I wonder if you can compare and contrast a little bit.
Jonathan, we've all worked for different people in different ways along our life. One of the benefits of growing up and serving in the military is every 2 to 3 years, my boss changed. So I learned to enjoy or tolerate a number of bosses during my 30-year career. Same could be said by those who worked for me. They either tolerated or learned something from me. We all know that the personalities of President Bush, President Obama, and Trump are so different. And I think it's incumbent on those who work for those leaders to understand where they fit in the food chain. Not about me, it's about them. Okay. And I learned early on, when you work for a president, you're not only doing work, but you're also part of a political reality. And when the work and the politics get cross-threaded, then for someone like me in the food chain, we have an opportunity to say, boy, it's been a pleasure to have served. I submit my resignation with deep respect.
Yeah.
And then disappear and not say a thing. Okay. The second day when I went to officer training school, my instructor was a Marine drill instructor. And he called me names that I had never heard of before. But he gave us all a good piece of advice. He said, you're going to work for a lot of different people. He said, I want you to go to the exchange and get a black book. And on the first page, say, who did I work for? Good guys and bad guys. In other words, their command style.
Yeah.
And make a list of the positives and the negatives. You will learn a lot. So I always did what the drill instructor told me to do. When I got permission to go to the exchange, I bought a little black book, and I still have it today. And when I would work for a commanding officer or someone who I got cross-threaded with or didn't work with, I made a notation. Good guys, bad guys. The list of bad traits and characteristics far exceed the list of good ones. And I only say that because it's important for us, no matter where you're in the food chain, to understand who your boss is.
Yeah. Admiral, I think regardless of party, this is something that all Americans can be proud of, that our leaders said it's a moral outrage that 250 million people a year catch malaria, and that 600,000 of them die, most of them under age 5. And as the richest country in the world, we can do something about that. And we did, and we are. And that's something that I think I feel immensely proud of, and I think all Americans can. But Admiral, let's go back in time. You grew up in Vietnam, as a son of missionaries. And I wonder if you can tell us about them and about the values they passed to you.
My mom and dad were post-World War II folks, and they watched the world torn apart. The church became a unifier, not only domestically here in the United States, but also in Asia and in Europe. And my mom and dad felt I'll use the word call, impulse to go and do church in Asia. They were assigned to the French colony, French Indochina, 1947. I was 7 months old. And they departed San Francisco on a World War II troop ship via Hawaii, Japan, Shanghai, and landed in Vietnam and were assigned up into the Central Highlands. They went to convey this idea that as individuals, there's more to life than just what we see and touch, that God is there, God has a purpose, life is important, and we can know God through Scripture and through Christ. That said, Jonathan, the humanitarian requirements were really high in agriculture, in health, in business development. And while they went to do church, they found themselves serving the poor and suffering. They were the mission had a clinic and leprosarium. So in addition to malaria, there was typhoid and there was leprosy. So
Mm.
growing up as a kid, I was afraid of tigers and leprosy. Leprosy was endemic, and the mission started a leprosarium. And what I saw growing up was dedication, selfless set of priorities given by a group of these wonderful folks we call missionaries who were actually humanitarians, both on the spiritual as well as the human side. And that impacted my values and my life for the rest of my life.
Admiral, we read sometimes about leprosy, but it's not something that we see in the United States and haven't seen it for many, many decades. When someone has leprosy, what does that actually look like?
Well, two things. Socially, when people catch leprosy, they're abandoned by their community. You see that in scripture. Historically, when someone has leprosy, they have to raise their hand and say, I'm unclean, stay away. That was true. Today, the good news is we understand the disease and it can be controlled and treated. During the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was endemic, and societies were ostracizing individuals who contracted and manifested the disease.
Does it make your skin fall off? What does it do?
It attacks your nerve cells and kills your cells, and so parts of your body start deteriorating. Uh, Once someone was identified with leprosy, they were put in treatment, and then the mission would establish 3 villages where someone who had contracted leprosy under treatment and no longer contagious, the families would then come to these villages, and and
Wow.
they would restore the family, the community. During the war, just anecdotally, it was interesting because the the South Vietnamese were afraid to mess with these segregation villages because of leprosy, and the communists from the North left them alone too because of leprosy. So there were three villages that thrived significantly while the conflict was going on.
Because no one wanted to catch leprosy.
Yeah.
Wow. After graduating high school, you came to the United States for college and you attended Wheaton College during the beginning of the Vietnam conflict. And you received word that these remarkable humanitarians, your parents, had been involved in the conflict and that your father had been killed, that your mother was severely wounded during the Tet Offensive.
Yeah, I was a senior in college, Jonathan. It was a weeknight, and the college chaplain knocked on the door. As soon as I saw him, I knew it wasn't going to be good news. And he asked to see me, and he shared with me that the mission compound had been attacked. My father and 5 other missionaries had been killed. My mother was injured and was being held captive by the North Vietnamese. It was a January night, Chicago, snow. And I remember walking that night trying to reconcile this idea that God is sovereign. And of course, the questions that we all ask when we're facing unknowns and tragedy is why? Why would someone doing church and important humanitarian work
Yeah, saving people from leprosy.
be exposed to this and taken out? I was in my 20s. I was kind of my own moral authority, Jonathan. Suddenly, the inadequacy of that became painfully obvious
Hmm,
as I was walking snow-swept streets at Wheaton College. And
hmm.
I got to the point, not quickly, but eventually being able to accept and embrace that regardless of the circumstances of the last couple days, the truths of scripture and what I had been taught and what I had been hearing my entire life was something I could hang on to. And it wasn't like the light bulb came on, but I hung on to it because that's all I had. It's all I had at the moment. And looking back, that process wasn't reconciliation, but it was moving the ball down the court in understanding not only from a spiritual perspective, but as a maturity. And okay, now what? How do I move forward and support my mom, who was at that point still a captive of the North Vietnamese?
So clearly, your parents lived out this faith as well, as you have said, with their work in Vietnam and among lepers. As you mentioned a few moments ago, your mom was taken captive by the North Vietnamese. And then when you saw her for the first time, wheeling off of a military plane here in the United States, she held up her hand to you and gave you something. And I wonder if you can tell us about
Yeah.
that moment, seeing your mom.
Yeah. Jonathan, that's one of life's peak memory points. After the chaplain told me that she had been captured, the North Vietnamese thought she was going to die because she had 18 hand grenade wounds. And so they left her by the side of the road as they retreated from the provincial capital. One of the nationals recognized her and took her to a provincial hospital. And one of the Vietnamese nurses recognized her as the American who ran the clinic and the school and the leprosarium and said to her, "You must hate my country and you must hate my people." And my mom looked up at her and she said, "No, no, I love your country and I love your people. I came to tell you about the God that gave me that love." Fast forward, I got word from a Navy chaplain that the C-141 was going to fly into Andrews Air Force Base and my mother was going to be evacuated. And so I took a took a bus from Chicago to Washington and somehow got on the base. And and when the C-141 rolled in, the chaplain said, "We can go on the airplane." So he grabbed me and I went on the airplane, and every stretcher on the C-141 was full of a body, a Marine, a soldier, a sailor, an airman. And there in the back was this old, prematurely gray-headed woman, my mom. And of course, I was emotional as I walked back. So was she, and she anticipated that emotion. So she gave me this note, and that's what you referred to.
And
And
what did the note say?
then she quoted the first stanza of the hymn, Count Your Blessings. And the stanza goes something like this: "When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you're discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your blessings, name them one by one. It'll surprise you what the Lord has done." Then she listed five. Jonathan, first, her faith in Christ. Second, for her marriage to my dad, who at 49 lost his life and was now with the Lord. Third, for the privilege of serving people and the church in Vietnam. Fourth, her three kids. I made the list.
You made the list.
Yeah. And the fifth blessing was the wonderful medical care that she had received. once she was found and brought into the medical system.
She is lying on a C-141 medical transport plane, having just been attacked by the Vietnamese people who she has spent the last several decades serving. They've killed her husband and left her with 18 hand grenade wounds. And number 3 on her list of blessings is the Vietnamese people. So the North Vietnamese killed your father and then gravely injured your mother. I wonder how that changed your view of people. Like, did you become hateful after that? Like, how did that change the way you view people?
You know what I've learned, Jonathan? We're all created in God's image as individuals. If you get to know a person, no matter where they come from, who they are, what their life's condition is, then you see the value of life and you get appalled when life is abused, when it's not respected, and when it's disposed of. So losing someone from combat is tragic. Losing someone in a car accident is tragic. A mother losing a child to malaria is tragic. So I found my reaction not so much against the North Vietnamese communists, but against the cause.
Mm. Following that tragedy, many people, probably me included, would have shied away from the region and from service, but you didn't. You joined the Navy and returned to Vietnam as a pilot. I wonder how you made that decision.
I was in my last semester of college, and like many individuals, didn't know what I was going to do. I applied to Trinity Seminary, Jonathan. That was the family business. I also applied to Georgetown and American University because I thought, oh, I could go back overseas and work in an embassy and stamp passports. I was accepted at all 3. I
Wow.
said, I have to make a decision here. Then there was an unintended, unexpected invitation from the U.S. government that congratulated me on my completion of college and invited me to serve as a draftee in the Army. I turned around in the student union, and providentially there were 2 Navy recruiters, and I dropped my draft notice on the table and said, what do you guys got better than this? They said, we can give you a test. If you qualify, you can join the Navy. And so I took some tests, took a physical. I said, hey, congratulations. Not only join the Navy, but you can go to flight school. Do you want to do that? So I evaded the draft by joining the Navy and ended up in flight school. And 15 months later, got my wings and headed back to Vietnam. While I was in flight school during a bad weather day, they were showing squadrons of different kinds of airplanes and mission. And one of the videos was of this Navy squadron flying helicopters in support of river patrol boats and Navy SEALs in Vietnam. I didn't understand. I understood the place, but not the mission. But I thought very amateurishly, hey, if I volunteer to go to that squadron, I can go home. So I volunteered to go to Helicopter Attack Light Squadron 3 and ended up going there as my first mission assignment. Had no intention of staying in the Navy, Jonathan, but 30 years later, I left and moved on to other things.
So you retire then as a Rear Admiral in the Navy, which is a coveted position that very few
Yes,
officers in the Navy reach.
yes.
And you transition from the rigid hierarchy of the Navy to leading World Relief, which is a faith-based nonprofit operating all over the world. But you've talked about how that was a very difficult transition, and I wonder why.
When I went to World Relief, 2 things popped up that were pretty sobering. One was this notion of rites of passage. In the Navy, I had started out flying helicopter gunships, so I earned a reputation up the food chain and was recognized for combat, flight time, command, etc. When I moved to World Relief, the same expectation of rites of passage became apparent. And the people that are in these amazing humanitarian organizations many of them started out in humanitarian camps, serving, passing out goods, relief goods, stepping back, coordinating it in a country, and then moving up the food chain. I moved in not from the bottom up, but laterally. The recognition of rites of passage was something that I didn't expect because I thought I could ride perhaps the reputation into justifying being the COO and eventually the CEO. And then the other is government didn't fund our compassionate ministry. And right after I took over, 9/11 hit, and President Bush turned off the immigration uh, uh, numbers. And so everything was put on hold, and World Relief was one of the organizations that helped HHS and the State Department resettle approved immigrants into the United States. So when that spigot was turned off by President Bush, the budget was turned off. And suddenly making payroll, which was $1 million a month, became a reality. I realized, Jonathan, that while I went to run the place, I was the chief fundraiser, and I wasn't ready to be the chief fundraiser.
Admiral, so you were well into retirement when President Bush asked you to lead the President's Malaria Initiative. You could have easily said no. You were enjoying retirement.
Yeah.
Why did you say yes?
I said no at first because I didn't want to go back in government. So when I got the initial call from White House personnel, it was easy to say, thanks, I'm flattered, but I'm not interested. About a week later, I got another wonderful call from the White House personnel office and said, we'd like you to at least come down and talk to us so we can explain the program. I had never been to the White House, so I thought I'll go to DC and I get to walk around the White House. So my reason to go was embarrassingly shallow and naive. When I got to White House personnel and they explained what President Bush's vision was, that he was focused on Africa, he was focused on this disease, he had a plan, he had targets, and he had a timeline to measure impact versus plan versus money. And I said, that sounds like a medical officer that you need to run a medical program. And I used to fly airplanes in the Navy. I'm not your medical guy. Now, about 2 weeks later, I said no again because I read the first job description, Jonathan.
Yep.
And it was coordinate this and interagency this and interagency this. And I said, I'm not your guy. I don't coordinate. I need 51% of the vote. At the end of the day, when all the discussion and recommendations are in, someone has to make a decision to stay on timeline. About a week later, I got a call back and I didn't expect it. And my job description had been changed, right? 51% of the vote for personnel funding and approving tactical plans. I said, I can do that. So that was the process by which I was recruited and agreed to go back to government.
Amazing. So under your leadership, malaria deaths drop 50%, from 600,000 deaths a year to 300,000 deaths a year. And you're credited, the President's Malaria Initiative is credited with saving 12 million people. Just for context, New York City has 8 million people as of last year. And the state of Georgia, where I live, has just under 12 million people, including the entire city of Atlanta, plus everything else. So that's a lot of people. How did you do it?
Well, it wasn't Tim Ziemer, okay?
Well, sure. But how did PMI do it?
PMI had a team, and I had a wonderful deputy. We hired great entomologists. We had a good collaboration with CDC and with the embassies. And we basically followed President Bush's vision. The country has to have malaria. Country has to have a plan. Country has to have other funders than the U.S. government, and the country has to be willing to work with us. And let's pick 3 countries. Second year, we'll add 5, and the third year, We'll add 7 more for a total of 15. We're looking for $1.2 billion. And the clincher was, and these are the results we're looking for, a drop of 50% in morbidity and mortality in malaria cases and deaths.
Which you achieved. So take us to a specific country. What in a given country, let's say, I'll let you name the country, but what would the specific approaches be to mitigate
Okay.
malaria?
So who was affected and died from malaria? It was the families out in the rural areas, mothers of childbearing age and kids under 5. Our target was to shoot for an 80% coverage of those at-risk population groups with 4 interventions: prevention, 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 treatment.
Hmm.
Bed nets, spraying walls, sulfur dioxide, paramethamine for pregnant women, testing any child with a fever to see if it was malaria or something else. And if it was malaria, we had wonderful drugs that would cure a child in 3 to 5 days. So we had the full package, but it was based on prevention, 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 tracking, and treatment. So that was the strategy and the objectives. And it was incumbent upon our teams working with the countries to surge the interventions to achieve those objectives and sub-objectives.
So can you tell us just a little bit more about the 3 layers of prevention: the bed nets, the wall spraying, and the drugs for women of childbearing age? What do those actually mean? For those of us in North America, we don't have much familiarity with any of those.
Yeah. First of all, again, keep in mind what causes malaria. It's a female Anopheles mosquito that looks for blood. And in houses that don't have air conditioning and screening, the mosquito will come in, land on the wall, sense someone sleeping or docile, and then fly over to that person and get a blood meal. And as the blood meal is taken, parasites are transmitted into the blood system, which go through several stages and basically attack the red blood cells and get into the liver, which causes fever and coma, and you get very sick. So we would spray the walls with uh, approved insecticides. So when the mosquito would land on the wall, it would kill it. And then if the mosquito didn't go to the wall, he would go to the bed net trying to get to the human. The bed net was treated with an insecticide, a pyrethroid or something, which was not only a barrier, but the pyrethroid would kill the mosquito. So that was prevention, prevention. And then women of childbearing age, sulfur dioxide, paramethamine in their first and second trimester apparently is a good preventative treatment. So we provided that for pregnant women that came into the clinics. So that was 3 prevention interventions.
And then on the treatment side, you said that you tested kids who had fevers, and if they tested positive for malaria, there's treatment available that could make them symptom free in several days. What was the opposite side though? If a child under 5 has malaria and is not treated, what typically happens?
Well, then they have a fever.
Yeah.
Could go into a coma. Some stay sick for a number of days and die, some heal. The falciparum parasite in Africa is much more serious than the vivax parasite in Asia. A lot more sick people than dead people in Asia. In Africa, the death rate exponentially goes up because of the nature of the parasite.
And so typically on the African continent, if a child has malaria, they're more likely to die.
Yeah, or get a very, very severe case.
Yeah.
And as you mature, the body does enact some resistance as individuals get older. On the economic side, think of it this way. Most African moms and fathers have a family of 4 or 5 kids. And in the rural areas, on economic impact, if a mom is working in a marketplace or a field on a $2 a day salary, imagine the economic impact it has on that mom when she has to stay home and care for a child.
Hmm.
4 or 5 days out of the field, out of the marketplace, and she has 4 or 5 kids. So you compound that. That is economic impact big time when she can't work. So we talk about billion here and a billion there, but to the people that are affected and being treated by malaria, those interventions had a direct economic positive impact on the families we sought to help and serve.
What did you learn from President and Mrs. Bush?
I remember my first briefing for President Bush was to give him an update, and I came up with 8 or 12 PowerPoint slides. I was told to reduce it to 3 or 4. I did, sent it ahead a week ahead of time, and got over to the Oval and walked in. And I said, he called me Z. Yeah, morning, Z. And then I said, I'm here to give you an update on PMI. You've seen the brief. He said, yeah, I don't need the brief. He said, all I have for you is just go save lives. That was it. And I said, so that's the end of our briefing. He said, it is. But that was George Bush at his best, because he understood what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
Save lives. And he didn't want the details.
Yeah.
He just said, I'll help you. Now go do it. Another anecdote with the president, I traveled up somewhere and he did a token malaria event. We got to the end of this boys club event and they were raising money for bed nets. And at the end, he had an opportunity to donate in the can to buy bed nets. And I knew the president didn't carry any money, and I was right behind him. I said, here, I'll cover for you. I'll drop a couple bucks in. And he looked at me, he said, Z, you can never cover for me. But that makes me smile, because it represented his humor, but his commitment to the cause when it was important for advocacy and to get the word out to the American people.
Yeah. Any stories or moments with President Trump that stand out?
Nothing significant except the discipline that he communicated as a businessman. When we were debating things like the merits of PEPFAR and PMI, his template was predicated on 5 requirements. What's the mission? How much is it going to cost? How do we measure our progress towards the mission? Who else is there? And when do we leave? So again, every time I made a submission, it wasn't a personal contact that I had with President Bush, but I admired the fact that any submission going to the Oval had to touch on those 5 business disciplines. Otherwise, it never made it into the package of recommendations. So I appreciated the fact that there had to be a plan, accountability, and results.
Together with USAID, the President's Malaria Initiative has effectively been shut down under President Trump's second term. And I wonder what your take is on the long-term impacts of that policy.
I think I noted a few minutes ago that Congress still has appropriated a significant amount of money for HIV and malaria. So the funds are there. How the funds are going to flow through country compacts underneath the leadership and direction of Secretary Rubio remains to be seen. I think the imperative, the drumbeat, is we can't lose momentum, because we know for sure that malaria will come back with a vengeance if we don't continue to control and treat malaria. So the time is shrinking on how much we can tread water from a U.S. contribution to these malaria endemic countries. That is the bass drum and the flashing warning light.
There's a shrinking time span, right, between the release of that funding and when the mosquitoes start biting again. And I wonder what happens if we wait too long.
I think Dr. Mohammed Jadawi said it all. We've eliminated malaria 3 times in Zanzibar. I hope this is the last time. Without a doubt, if the countries don't continue to pursue the prevention interventions, they're going to see a rebound of malaria. And it's going to come back with a vengeance, because some of the mosquitoes have already developed a resistance to previous insecticides and the therapeutics. So you got to stay ahead of it, because the insects have demonstrated persistence of endurance that humans haven't been able to confound.
Admiral, several years ago, you received a prestigious Roger E. Joseph Prize, which is a particular honor because it's typically given to folks who fight anti-Semitism, and you were given it for your work fighting malaria. In your acceptance speech, you said, quote, "Pray that the Lord does something in your life so that you will be empowered to do something in the lives of others." And I wonder how you've seen that play out in your own life.
I think that's what we've been talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
God is at work not only through us, but in us to do wonderful things. Malaria, HIV, nurture our families. He's preparing us, opening our minds and our hearts. So we are never off the treadmill of being prepared. But it doesn't end there. We're not just intaking. We have to flip the coin over and say, now what?
Admiral, you recently lost your wife, Jodi, of more than 54 years. And yet you have also said in recent speeches that God uses circumstances to draw us to him, not to push us away. And I wonder how losing Jodi has changed you and whether it has drawn you closer to God.
When Jodi died suddenly from a brain aneurysm,
I'm so
she
sorry.
left in an instant. Okay. I went from taking her coffee and having a quick reading in the morning to calling our emergency in just minutes. I found myself looking forward to being on the Golden Pond with her in retirement. And I suddenly realized that I was on the Golden Pond in a canoe by myself. And then the real question is, now what? So I think after Jodi's life, and I'm almost ashamed to tell you this, but it's given me a time to go into the wilderness and punctuate the reality of what's important in life. And it really hinges on where do I line up with providential purposes of God, the wonderful family he has given me. How do I perpetuate that and encourage my friends and acquaintances?
Faith, family, friends. That
Yes,
sounds
sir.
like those are your anchors. Admiral, I wonder what final challenge you would leave with me and with other folks listening to this podcast.
The question I ask a lot of people is, what motivates you? I think we've heard the account of when Mother Teresa was on her deathbed. Someone asked her what she wanted to be remembered for. Her response was, "I'm not called to be remembered. I'm called to be faithful." Faithful to what? Communicating God, the reality of God, his love for us, his provision for us through thick and thin, and the opportunity given to us to enjoy life and to serve others.
Admiral, it's an honor to talk to you. It's an honor to hear about your life of service. And thank you for what you have shared with us. Thank you for what you did for on behalf of the American taxpayer in saving millions of lives and preventing billions of cases of malaria. It's been an honor to spend some time with you.
Jonathan, good getting reconnected. I look forward to staying in touch.
As I stand here in my treehouse studio, I'm struck by two things. First, Admiral Ziemer's mom's gratitude as she sat on the tarmac of Andrews Air Force Base in that air ambulance, gravely wounded. And I can't help but wonder, would I be that grateful? Second, after a lifetime of service, Admiral Ziemer's challenge to live a life that is not designed to be remembered, but is designed to be faithful. It's a challenge that's going to ring in my ears for a long time. Next week, I'm joined by the former Attorney General and his wife for their first ever interview after leaving office. They talk about their time in the wilderness, just as Admiral Ziemer did. I'll see you next week on The Stumble.